name is Keith Kruger, and I am not the third untalented civic sister. It is my pleasure to be here tonight in Denver, and in fact, I am going to talk about that C worldview view of things. We're going to be talking about mastering the moment. How do we reimagine education in a time of economic crisis? If we think back, what I want to start off with, though, is how much society has changed in the last few years. So if we think to just a decade ago, if you wanted to buy a book, you went to a bookstore. Now, we can just about anywhere with an internet connection on Amazon.com download a book. Likewise with music. A decade ago, you had to go to a record store, find a CD, hope that they had something in stock. Now you can go to Pandora or iTunes. And not only that, but if I purchase a book on Amazon.com or buy something on iTunes, they predict things that I might be interested in. It's no longer about finding something that's for the average, it's finding something for me. Likewise for information. We used to have to go, 15, 20 years ago to the library. Now, everyone who has an internet connection, probably in their pocket with their cell phone, has access to the world's information. This is a Business Insider in just last December wanted to know what had become obsolete in the last 10 years, from 2000 on. Now, this is an interesting list. There were 21 things: PDAs, VCRs, 411, CDs, phone books, dictionaries, encyclopedias. You can agree or disagree with the list, but the point is there's been tremendous obsolescence of things that were everyday common just a decade ago. And the question, even tonight, this particular event is web streamed around the world. You can be anywhere, not just in Denver, and find it instantaneously. You can find a copy of my slides and download it right now. So what does that mean, though, in terms of change? The rate of change has been enormous. We've gone from businesses rethinking their business practices. It wasn't that Amazon.com or iTunes tried to improve business of book selling and music, but rather they tried to transform it. They tried to go from a mass industrial context of serving the average consumer to really moving to mass customization. So what does that mean for education? Have things similarly caught up? Well, here's a picture of a classroom in about 100 years ago. Here's a classroom in 2002. How much has changed? We still see a teacher, we still see neat rows of classes, perhaps a little bit more diverse, but how much have we fundamentally changed the structure of education? Now, let me be very clear. I am not saying that there is no innovation. For heaven's sakes, we're in Denver, we're at the ISTE conference. There's all kinds of innovation. In fact, CoSN works with the New Media Consortium to do the Horizon report. The Horizon K-12 report identifies all kinds of exciting things that are happening with individual teachers in the United States and around the world. You can go in any school district and find a hero teacher. You can find what I would call an island of innovation. And in fact, tonight, we're going to be hearing from some really great, innovative educators. But the question is, have we changed the system? In fact, does the ocean fight the island? Do our policies, do our leaders support the island? Do they try to make the island bigger? Or are they fighting it to keep it in check? So how do we reimagine learning in the 21st century? What's different? What are the big questions that we really should be asking? And I think we need to start with, how do we personalize and individualize instruction? How do we, in a 24/7 environment, allow kids to move at their own pace? How do we make it an engaging environment that every learner wants to be there? How do we bridge that informal and formal education? As John Seely Brown says in his new book, The Power of Pull, that we as institutions need to move from trying to push kids to learn to how do we leverage the natural pull that they have through their natural curiosity. So what I want to talk about also is mastering this moment, because this moment is a little different. In fact, we're in really a tough economic time. This is probably the worst economic situation since the Great Depression. That means that money is really tight. In fact, our Superintendents Association just put out a survey. They said that 275,000 education jobs in the United States are likely to be lost in the next year. They also said 82% of school districts are likely to be laying off people, and 53% have a complete hiring freeze. Now, about a year ago, President Obama became president. They passed the Economic Recovery Act. We were fortunate that much of that focus, in fact, was focused on education. About $100 million, most of it for K-12, most of it to save teacher jobs, happened. And it did save jobs for that year. That money's running out. And it's running out just as states and localities are going through even greater budget cuts. So while the rest of the economy is looking a little brighter, we have a real challenge in that for education and for the public sector, the worst isn't here yet. And I run a technology association, people who in school districts are in charge of technology. Tight budgets aren't anything new for my audience. In fact, in 2004, 62% of school districts said they had a flat or declining budget for technology. And that was a much better economic time. So this isn't a new trend. Now, I'm reminded of Franklin Delano Roosevelt's quote, who said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Well, I grew up in Minnesota and we had lots of deer. And you know what happens with deer when you're riding down the road and they get in your headlights? You have a new hood ornament. And unfortunately, that fear, that paralysis of waiting until we're told what's going to happen with our budgets, is in fact a paralysis, is a fear, is a deer in the headlights syndrome that is happening in education. We're afraid to do new things because there's no new money. I'm going to suggest, though, that there are in fact some new ways, and I think we have to start, though, with what are the big problems. And clearly, we have a big problem in terms of education with our dropout rate. 1 in every 5 students are dropping out. Every 29 seconds, a high school student leaves the American school system. We have to do something about that. Likewise, the skills that kids need are changing. This is a very complicated chart that I don't have time to explain. It's from the organizations concerned, it's OECD, which looks at the 30 industrialized nations. The point of it is that since 1960 to the current year, the only skills that are increasing are non-routine analytic and non-routine interactive. In other words, critical thinking. The other skills can be offshored or outsourced. Now, the problem with that is those are the most difficult skills to educate people on. This isn't a problem just for the United States. This is a problem for every country in the world, and we need to start a global conversation about what kind of skills kids need. We've been trying to do some work with superintendents, and we've asked them, what are your big priorities? What are you trying to solve with the American education system? And these are the 5 things they told us. First of all, they want to make sure that kids do have the right skills, that they're not only the basics, but what they call 21st century skills: creativity, collaboration, critical thinking. They also want to make sure that the learning space is in fact compelling. We already talked about the dropout problem. Well, we also have an engagement problem. In fact, some say that the school system is an awful lot like a prison. The longer you're there, the more you hate it. And we do okay at the elementary school, but by the time we're in high school, even our best kids are often bored and not engaged. The third thing superintendents told us they cared about was a different kind of professional development. That the kind of professional development we're doing, which is after school or in the summer, is one-time drive-by, and it's not, educators, teachers, and principals are in many ways the most isolated white-collar professional. How do we create a 24/7 community of practice that allows the teacher to find the answer when they need it, not when it's provided? Fourth, superintendents said they want to know how to use data to make informed decision-making, and they want to do a better job of communicating to their community. And finally, and this would be their top priority if they had to rank them in order and they could only pick one, they want new kinds of assessments, that the one time a year high-stakes test doesn't give us the information that's continuous, it's not balanced. They need data that goes on a formative basis to teachers to make different kinds of instruction. Employers, this is a new survey that just came out last month. It was done by the American Management Association, and over 70% of employers said that over the next 3 years, the most growing skills are critical thinking, problem solving, effective communication, collaboration, team building, and creativity and innovation. Okay, how many of our high-stakes tests test any of those 4 things? And when we look at how technology is used in education, this was a study that was done by the US Department of Commerce. They looked at 55 industry sectors, ranked them by the amount of IT intensiveness. Guess which one was 55? The bottom of the barrel, lower than coal mining. So when we think about technology, I think we have to remember that we go through various waves, regardless of what industry sector we're in. And the first wave is, in fact, around infrastructure and wires and boxes, and that's kind of what we've been doing in education. It makes basic and essential, it's needed, but it doesn't, we quickly move into wave 2. Of course, wave 1, you continue to have to work on things like bandwidth. Wave 2 is really around supportive applications, and I think this is where we've been spending a lot of time on professional development, getting users to do it. It makes things more effective and efficient, but it really fundamentally doesn't change the structure of what we've been doing. What I think we need to focus on are wave 3 technologies, which is transformative. If we think back to what Amazon.com did, they weren't thinking about improving bookstores, they were thinking about transforming the way that you get books. So how do we do that, and how do we stay focused on what's really important, especially in a time of economic recession? Well, let me suggest 3 things that I'm not suggesting will solve all of education, but rather they're things that we can do today that we couldn't do just a year or 2 ago. And I state them in order to start a conversation. I'm certainly not suggesting that they are the only answers. Well, one problem we have is that we don't really have a very rich, ubiquitous environment within the average classroom. In the United States, it's about a device for every 4 or 5 kids. Now, there are some school districts, there's even a state or 2 that are doing one-to-one initiatives. But the average superintendent or CTO will tell you they can't afford to do it because they're trying to pay for a device for every kid. Well, there's a different way of doing it. It's called leveraging the devices that kids and teachers already have. They do it with a guest wireless network that's safe and secure. And in fact, it's already happening. In Forsyth County, a school district of about 30,000 just outside of Atlanta, started it this last year. They did it as an opportunity for principals to volunteer, and a couple of principals did. It spread like wildfire. So everybody wanted to do it. It spread to the elementary school. And in fact, an interesting anecdote is, in 5th grade, the #1 device is the Sony Nintendo DSi. Teachers never expected to see those in the classroom. Problem number 2, a different way of thinking. The problem we have is that in K-12, we don't have very much technical support. In fact, for every device, for every computer technician within K-12, they have to handle about 630 devices. In every other industry sector, it averages about 150 devices to a technician. That means it's really hard to upgrade software. It's very laborious. They spend weeks on it over the summer, and it doesn't really happen. So I think there's some new opportunities around cloud computing. What I mean by cloud computing is that and I'd call it sort of web services, to be simple. The application no longer resides on the device you're using. It doesn't reside on the server within your school district, but rather it's out on the cloud. And in fact, we have some new examples that just happened this spring. In April, the state of Oregon, on a statewide basis, announced that they've, for a year, been negotiating with Google education applications, free apps. They have made available to their 500,000 students Gmail, a shared workspace, video streaming, and the variety of tools that are under there. The state superintendent of Oregon says that's going to save them about $1.5 million a year. I will mention that the state of Kentucky is doing some work with Microsoft Live at EDU, which also is a similar effort. The third problem I want to talk about is, in fact, stimulating creativity and collaboration. Question: do we really think that any one person is going to win the Nobel Prize in science anymore? Frankly, that's not the way that most science research happens. The big breakthroughs happen in teams, they happen globally, they happen by bringing the best people together working on the same problem. Is our education system using the sort of collaboration that's possible in society? Web 2.0, in fact, is the opportunity. Now, I know we have a lot of teachers in the room, and you're probably saying, oh, I'm already using wikis and blogs. But the question that I would ask is, have we fundamentally rethought the pedagogy of how we're using it, or are we simply adding on these collaborative tools on top of the way we're already operating? And I want to talk about one particular school district in Texas, Birdville, which is a school district of a little over 20,000. They, I think, have rethought their philosophy. They have an open access policy. They're using Twitter to connect to parents. They're using Facebook fan pages to connect with the community. They're using Skype within the classroom to connect to other classrooms and to experts. And even YouTube. I know, here's where I'm losing a lot of educators, because there's a lot of stuff on YouTube that's not educational. But Birdville has had an educational philosophy that they want to make the kid the filter. And so it's all about making kids prepared to live in an unfiltered world. I would argue that Birdville, the state of Kentucky and Oregon, the Forsyth County are in fact all mastering the moment. I also mentioned earlier that, that there were 62% of school districts that had flat or declining budgets. The interesting thing is to look at what the 38% of districts that weren't losing, had increasing money for technology. There were only two factors that made a difference. First of all, that the leadership had a real vision around what they were doing, that the superintendent, the school board, there was clarity about what the purpose of the technology was. And secondly, that there was community support for it. My one little tip, if you think that your school district or school doesn't have the resources, go before your local chamber of commerce, bring in a panel of kids. Ask the business community what skills they want, and ask them to go before your school board to make the presentation about why technology is important. So again, the three solutions I talked about were leveraging student-owned devices, cloud computing, and Web 2.0 tools. So my challenge to you is, are you ready to start a conversation about reimagining learning? And by that, how do we go to your local PTA, your local school board, your local chamber of commerce? And I challenge you as your homework to start that conversation, to talk about what it is. I'm reminded of Eric Hoffer, who said, in times of change, learners inherit the earth, while the learned inherit a world that no longer exists. Let's make sure that our educational system is preparing kids for today and tomorrow, not for yesterday. Thank you.